lessons can we learn from 1,000 divorces? I never set out to be a divorce lawyer. I was practicing criminal law, and the biggest divorce attorney in Atlanta approached me and offered to double my salary to join his firm, where I would get to represent multimillionaires and celebrities, including musicians that I listened to, athletes whose posters were on my wall growing up, which sounds cool, and maybe it should have been obvious in retrospect, but they don't invite the divorce lawyers to the parties. But anyway, I jumped at the chance, and I did not know the first thing about divorce. My parents were still together. They just celebrated 57 years in August. Thank you. My sisters and most of my friends weren't even married, much less were they divorced. And here I am thrown into the most emotionally charged, life-changing litigation, custody, visitation, divvying up people's life savings, divorce. And I had an immediate takeaway that I'm going to share with you all today. Okay, that's my time. I hope it's been helpful. Thank you all. It's been great. No, look, it wasn't that I was opposed to, finding a life partner, starting a family, growing old with someone. I was just terrified of actually legally getting married. You see, we all marry for love, but there's a contract attached to those vows, an addendum, if you will. That's legalese. And most of my clients didn't learn the full extent of what being married meant for their finances until they were sitting in my office going through a divorce. It turns out marriage is the most important financial contract you'll ever sign in your life. And most people haven't read it. And if marriage ends, it's devastating on a couple of fronts. There's divorce, meaning the end of the relationship that you thought was going to last forever. And that's hard enough. But then there's the divorce case, meaning the lawsuit that gets filed with the court. And it's very easy to get wrapped up in a year plus of litigation, all the stress, the impact on kids. It wasn't unusual for couples to spend 25% of their net worth fighting over who got the majority of the other 75%. It was, you could say it was an eye-opening experience. And the point is, a messy divorce is best avoided at pretty much all costs. I don't think that's too controversial of a statement to make. And so my logic was, what's the leading cause of divorce? Marriage. Marriage is responsible for 100% of divorces. Some people don't know that. And so I told all of my friends and family and anyone who would listen, just don't do it. Just don't get married. Like throw a big party instead. Hire a DJ. Wear a white dress. Change your last name if that's your thing. But don't actually go through with the vows because you have no idea what you're signing up for. As you can imagine, I was super popular with my friends' significant others. But I would like to think that I have evolved over time. I am now happily married to my beautiful wife and the mother of my daughter, and thank you. And now I think I've got a better recommendation than eternal solitude. And it doesn't matter whether you're single, whether you're a newlywed, or whether you've been married for 20 years. I think you're going to get something from the lessons I learned from 1,000 divorce cases. Lesson number one, most of the problems that broke these couples up were there from the very beginning of their relationship. Common culprit, it's easier to get physically naked with someone than to get fiscally naked with someone, right? I mean, not in this room, of course. I mean, somebody in the lobby handed me a QR code to his personal financial statement, but out there in the real world, it's not unusual for couples to be married 10, 20 years and still not know the details of each other's finances. And if couples don't know the details of each other's finances, the idea that they're going to be able to combine their financial lives in a way that doesn't breed arguments and resentment is really preposterous. What we would see is one of two things. Either couples would combine all of their finances in one bank account, except one spouse is a spender and the other is a saver, at least relative to each other, right? And this couple would have tons of open arguments or silent resentment or some kind of mix of both. Or you would have couples that kept their finances totally separate. And this one's tricky because it seems like it's working at the beginning, this kind of like roommate contribution to the joint expenses, but over time, the difference in their incomes grows and the gap in their standard of living widens. And before you know it, you have two spouses living under the same roof, but in different socioeconomic classes. And that doesn't work. You can't just go Dutch for life. And these are just two of the most common predictable ways that we saw couples break up over money. Lesson number 2, navigating financial marriage is way more difficult for us than it's ever been in the past. So my parents got married in the 1960s. Back then, the average couple got married at age 21. This couple was likely to have one bank account between the two of them. They had no credit cards. They barely existed. They were seen as a tool for the super wealthy. They had no retirement accounts. 401ks hadn't even been invented yet. Pension hadn't kicked in yet. They maybe had one car between the two of them. They had, student loans. You could still work your way through school back then. And so even if you had student loans, they were manageable. You could pay them off relatively quickly. This couple likely had no house, no business. These couples were a financial blank slate. They built their financial lives from scratch. If they were a startup, if they were a business, they'd be a startup in your garage. Compare that to the average couple getting married today. The average couple getting married today is around age 29 or 30 on average. And this couple is likely to have 4 to 5 bank accounts each, 3 to 4 credit cards each. They each have their own car. Student loans can be in the tens or even hundreds of thousands because they didn't listen to Chris Corinthian's speech. And they are likely to have, one spouse has equity in a condo or a house, one spouse is coming in with a stake in a small business or maybe stock options in a large business. And maybe more important than all of these differences is each of these spouses has a decade of financial habits that are baked in from the time that they left their parents' house. And so if the couple of the 1960s getting married was a startup in your garage, the couples who get married today are a corporate merger. And no one in this room would merge their business with another person's business without a detailed written agreement of how are we going to make this work. Yet most couples getting married spend more time debating the guest list for a wedding than discussing the financial structure that is supposed to last them for the rest of their lives. Which brings me to lesson number 3. A prenup is the partnership agreement for your marriage. I know what some of you are thinking, like a partnership agreement? I thought a prenup was basically planning your divorce before you even get married. And I get it. I used to think the exact same thing. But you can't talk about what would be fair in a divorce without first talking about what are you going to do during the marriage itself. How are we going to set up the bank accounts? Is all of the income going to go into one bank account and then maybe we transfer some money out there for our own spending? Or are we going to have all the income go into separate bank accounts and then we contribute to a joint account to pay for the joint expenses? What about what we're bringing in, assets? Are we going to be 50-50 owners of like every asset that either of us have, even the stuff that we had coming in? Or is there going to be some things that are in the marital circle, and then we have some things that are outside of that that we own separately? What about the debts we're bringing in? Credit cards, student loans. Do we see those as joint, or do we see those as separate? And yes, what if, God forbid, we don't make it? What would be fair? Any business partnership agreement worth the paper it's written on is going to talk about what happens if one of the partners wants to leave the business, if you have to buy out a partner stake in the business. But we don't accuse these business people of planning for their business to fail. No, in fact, it's the exact opposite. We say that they're being prudent by planning for all of these contingencies. They're trying to make it so that things go smooth no matter what. Same thing for a prenup. Can we just say what we both think would be fair if the marriage came to an end? Can we just both put it out there? And if we say the same thing, then great. We can put it down in writing, we can lock it in, and we can resolve this issue from here on out. But if what we say would be fair is different, then still great, because now we have an opportunity to discuss it and see if we can come to a resolution in the middle or not, right? But either way, you're better off rather than moving forward potentially decades in your marriage based on mismatched assumptions. You can plan for divorce without planning to divorce. We do it with everything else in life. I have car insurance, but it doesn't mean that I go out and drive recklessly, right? I bought a life insurance policy, but I didn't take up base jumping the next day. I have home insurance, but I still managed to turn the oven off when I left the house. And just like that, I can insure myself against a messy divorce and still do everything in my power to make sure that my marriage lasts. And still, some of you are probably thinking, yeah, Aaron, I get that all sounds logical, but a prenup, I just can't wrap my mind around getting, maybe it's the word prenup, but I can't see myself actually getting a prenup. Well, I hate to break it to you. You already got one. That's right, every married couple has a prenup. You either write your own prenup, or you are accepting the default prenup that is written by the state where you happen to live. A prenup is just a set of rules that defines your financial relationship both during and, if necessary, after marriage. And so we've all got a prenup. And the default prenup, if it were actually a piece of paper that you had to physically sign, like if we were sitting there on a table with the default prenup next to a customizable prenup, nobody would sign the default prenup. Why? Because it gives ultimate power over your life savings to somebody else. Yeah, a default prenup says, if you break this marital contract, the distribution of your entire net worth is up to the moral judgment of a complete stranger, a judge to whom your case is randomly assigned. And there's this common misconception of, oh, it's too late for us to get a prenup or a postnup. Everything's already mixed in. We're already in there, 50-50 on everything. But in 41 out of the 50 states, the courts aren't required to split your assets 50-50. They can split them 60-40 or 70-30 based on their subjective opinion of each spouse's contributions to the marriage. And there's this funny thing about contributions to the marriage. Even in a relationship that is like a true 50-50 relationship, where like objectively each spouse is like pulling their own weight and doing their job in the relationship, it still feels like you're doing 2/3 of the work, doesn't it? Like, even in happy relationships, like, I see everything that I do in the relationship. My wife, how do I know how the dishes got put away, really, And so it's very easy to find yourself in a situation where each spouse feels like they're getting slighted by just getting 50% of the assets. And so many of my clients just wanted to split everything down the center and walk away. Turns out, if you just want the ability to have 50-50 and move on with your life, you've got to put that in a prenup. It's wild. The default prenup also says that what you had coming into the marriage is your separate property. What you accumulate during the marriage is your marital property. And so you think if you get divorced, we each keep our separate property and we split our marital property. Easy peasy, right? But what no one tells you is that your very paycheck is considered marital property. It's marital income. And what do you do when you get that first paycheck after your wedding? You take a little bit of it and you put it in that checking account you had before the marriage. You put a little bit in your savings account you had before the marriage. Some of it goes in your retirement account you had before the marriage. Maybe you pay down the mortgage on that house you had coming in. You pay down the car note coming in. And now all of those things in the eyes of the law are commingled with marital property. And a few years down the line, all of these things are up for division. 50% of my job as a divorce lawyer was having this very conversation with my clients. What do you mean she wants half of my retirement that I've been contributing to for my entire adult life? What do you mean he wants half of the house that I had before the marriage that I'm the only one that's paying the mortgage on? And I'd have to explain to them that you contributed to with marital money and now it's up for division. If you want the protection of what you had coming in that is supposed to come with the default prenup, you've got to put it in your own prenup. In any financial partnership that any of us have, like a business, we decide on the ownership rules, what's mine, what's yours, what's ours, up front. The default prenup says you got to decide who knows what when you hate each other. Guess how that goes? And if you can't agree, pay the lawyers. And that's the unfortunate truth about marital finance. Couples who don't negotiate their financial relationship at the beginning of their marriage often pay lawyers to have that negotiation in their divorce. So you might as well start negotiating now. I mean, when you think about it, marriage is kind of one long negotiation anyway. I mean, I was negotiating my share of the bed covers before I got here today. And it pains me when people say, but Aaron, prenups aren't romantic, which, first of all, what percentage of married life do you think is romantic? Do you think that this is 50 years of rose petals and champagne flutes? But, I mean, tell me you've never been married without telling me you've never been married. But also, learning how to navigate potentially sticky issues with your partner, even in difficult conversations, isn't unromantic. It's practice for married life. And more than that, a prenup might be the thing that saves your marriage. Sounds like a stretch? Here's how we did it. We looked at 1,000 divorce cases and we categorized the most common issues that broke couples up. And then we reverse engineered solutions to try to solve those problems. Very common problem. One spouse is a spender and the other spouse is a saver. And these couples drive each other crazy, especially when those expenses are coming out of one bank account. And so we like the idea of money buckets, where you take the household income and you use it to fund a joint account that pays for the joint bills and the joint savings goals, and then each spouse gets money that flows into their separate bank accounts that they can use for whatever they want. And we get the best of both worlds. We get the benefit of joining our financial lives together and building a financial life with our partner while still maintaining the benefit of having autonomy over our own discretionary spending. So my wife can use her years-old iPhone and go out to lunch with her friends every day, and I can have the latest gadgets and brown bag it, and we don't drive each other crazy because we don't even see each other's spending. Turns out your spouse really doesn't like it when you make a big purchase or a huge financial decision without talking to them first. And so we like including in our agreements the idea of these large expense check-ins where anything over a certain threshold has to be discussed before you do it with joint money. For some couples, it's $250. For some, it's $500. For some people, it's $1,000. I had one NBA player tell me, anything under $10,000, I don't even need to know about it. But like at $10,000 and up, I want to know. Everybody's got a number. Even the person making 8 figures a year has a number over which they want to know before it comes out of the joint account. We write it in the prenup. Lack of transparency and communication, this might be the biggest problem that couples have. Fun fact, for a prenup to be enforceable in all 50 states, each spouse has to disclose all of their assets and debts to their partner on the front end, usually down in writing. But what we found is that marital finance is not a set it and forget it type of relationship. And so we like this idea of having an annual shareholders meeting for your house, where you have a specific agenda of certain things that you're going to discuss. Last year's spending, were there any big surprises? What are our current incomes? How are our investments doing? What's our budget for next year? What are the big expenses we're planning for? Can we take a look at our subscriptions? Do we need all of these? Is it time to combine our Netflix accounts? Do we have enough insurance? And in this way, we make the continued transparency and communication about finances in your household intentional. Couples would often tell us, if we're having a conversation about money, it's almost certainly in the context of an argument. Money talks means we're already fighting. And so we suggest using shared goal funds. What do you and your partner value as a couple? What do you agree on when it comes to money? And can we make sure that we are using our household resources to this end? And that way you have something that brings you together. For me and my wife, it's travel. We love to travel. And so we agreed that we would put 5% of all of our household income into a travel fund so that whenever we want to take a trip, the money's there, and the more money we bring in, the better or longer travel we get to take. For some couples, it might be the baby fund, or buying a rental property fund, or a quit your job fund. Anyone? And I'm not so naive as to think that a prenup is going to solve every problem that you have in your marriage. But what we can do is create a framework that makes it more likely that these problems are going to be resolved when they arise. The big thing we love to do here is counseling provisions. So what we found is couples would have an argument, and one spouse would say to the other, I think we need to go do some counseling. But because it was on the tail end of an argument, spouse number two would take it as an accusation that there was something wrong with them, and they would shoot down the idea. And then by the time spouse two came around to the idea of counseling, spouse number one had given up on the counseling or maybe on the relationship itself. And so what couples like to do is agree on the front end. If either one of us wants to go to counseling, we're going to counseling. Each spouse can trigger this provision once per year, and you got to go to 3 counseling sessions at a minimum. And if divorce is actually on the table, then we double that number to 6, or make it 10 or 12. And that way, we have the framework in place for these couples to know that they have an out to resolve issues when they arise. And what about our termination clause? We decide what's fair up front. And for me and my wife, we're going to split anything in joint names 50-50, and we keep everything in our separate names. And for me, this might be the most romantic part of the prenup for me, because what it says is, even if we get to a place where I can't stand you, I'm still willing to be legally committed to be fair. In our Phi community, we are intentional about everything when it comes to our finances. Maximizing our income, maximizing our savings rate, optimizing our investment approach, optimizing our withdrawal rate. Let's be just as intentional about the financial relationship that makes it all possible. Yes, financial independence is better with friends, and it can be better with your spouse as well. Thank you.